Maria.
Welcome, everybody, to WCEG Network, the WCEG Talk Radio. Join us at WCEGTalkRadio.com. We are the Worldwide Empowerment Group, and we're very, very happy to have with us today Maria Azuri. You'll hear a lot about her. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can even follow us on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio. Call us in at the number under the screen, 678-619-1402. This is Take a Stand, and I am the host, Reverend Diane Dougherty. And I'm very excited that Maria said that she would come on this show because we've known each other since the inception of 1 Billion Rising, Atlanta. And actually, 1 Billion Rising Atlanta was the reason this particular show was started.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Uh-huh. So we made some great connections during that time.
We did indeed.
Just in passing, we haven't seen each other for a long time, but we still live in each other's hearts. Maria is an exceptional, this is what she writes about herself. She is the regional director for the Foundation Center, a service of Candid. And she is, as she says, she's an exceptional relationship program builder and a creator. She has a strong development and community-based education approach that has led to multiple successful programs, partnerships, and collaborations with diverse intersection of issues across multiple organizations. Intersectionality has always been something that is really important, I think, to all of us. I don't think many people really understand intersectionality, but for me, I think of all of the crossing of issues and programs and policies that are going on and how these movements and forces are changing our lives, many times without our knowledge or even experience until after the fact. So what Maria says in her thing that really struck me is that she's guided by an ethos of serving as a bridge of empowerment. That is what is exciting to me, because this is the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group. So what better person to have on our Take a Stand? Her family is an immigrant background. She has an immigrant background, which provides very rich perspectives, so that she carries with her backgrounds that we, who are Caucasian and white, have not experienced, but really works on practical collaborations that impact the people within a community. So welcome. We're so glad to have you here, Maria.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about what you want to say about yourself.
Oh, I think that it's funny, we get to write these bios about us, and I think that the first thing that I always, when I walk in any places is still that immigrant kid that came with my mom and my dad and my sister in the mid 1980s and really frightened and hopeful, but plucked out of our world, really, that was full of love and family. And so I think that that's always what, when I walk into any new place, I feel, because I'm a very extroverted person and I love being connected and connecting to other people. But I always very much remember what it was like to just be so frightened all the time, to not speak the language, to everything be really foreign and different. And
how old were you?
7.
Wow.
And having just that be such a stark difference, and it's such a different reality for my sister and me and my parents and our home community in Mendoza, Argentina, and from my mom being the head of the PTA and very involved in our whole lives. And then coming here and being nothing but scared all the time and just always being outsider, and my parents not speaking English and us not speaking English. And so my sister and I think the intersectionality of it comes is having those big terms of being the brokers with my family we had no choice but to be that. And before all those terms were anything
That's
that
right.
were used.
That's right.
And so, I mean, we went back to the 80s. And so when I eventually went into, like, declared my major as a social worker at Georgia State University, and I found after going to Lunch and Learn, come learn about social work and what that's all about, I was like, wow, this is my life. I've always been a social worker. And I've always,
That's right.
yeah, I've always done these things and been a broker and been a cultural liaison and helped bridge people to, not in a hierarchical way, but really just help people get in and feel welcomed, because that's what our task had always been, helping my parents feel more welcomed, integrating ourselves when the environment wasn't always welcoming. It was back in the 80s and 90s. It's a very different world than it is today for immigrants in this country.
That's right.
There weren't a lot of spaces that were open or conducive, or where there was community outside of the church. And so, walking in any place, I always remember that little girl and thinking that now I've got all this education and I know all these amazing and lovely people, but first and foremost, I'm my mother's daughter and their child. And so I think that just allows me to always lead from a place of humility and what it feels like to be frightened. And I think we're all frightened a lot, and we put on these faces and these facades. And I've never been good at that. I've always just been where I am and trying to help other people feel comfortable in where they are and be welcomed.
That is profound.
Yeah.
That is profound, because I think it's really true for people who are afraid of immigrants. They have that fear, and in your presence, they become the immigrant. They become someone that, not sure you're going to welcome me.
Absolutely. And I think that, being an immigrant teaches you that we all just want the same things, which are very basic. And we all hear about these things in the political sphere and in churches and in schools. But the way that we make it in the lived experience is so complicated and so complex. When it comes down to being welcomed or welcoming, if I call the police or 911, will there be a response to any and everybody? If I go to the park, will my family and my children be safe? When I go to school, if I go to school, will I be able to learn and be in a classroom? And if I have a medical need, will that be taken care of in a hospital? And those are across the world. And we make it so terribly complicated and so painful when it shouldn't be.
That's right. That's right. And for all of the listening people, how many people have you welcomed today?
Oh,
That's what I always say. Who did you welcome?
Well,
I mean, even if they're watching TV, my old people that watch TV, I say, oh, what did you think about them? Were you welcoming? Or are you afraid of them?
I think that's really
And
important.
we talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important is to think of, one of the things I just think about, one day it came to me, it was, what's your echo when you leave the room? And what do you make that energy
Oh, I
feel
love that.
like?
What is your echo when you leave the room?
And that came to me one time because I had, there was somebody that was very toxic that had really left a damaged environment, a damaged just feeling. And I was like, wow, what's the opposite of that? And how do we become more conscientious of what our own echo is? What do people hear, feel, and sense when you walk into a place and when you leave a place? And so who I welcomed this morning, first and foremost, are my 3 beautiful boys. I have 3 beautiful boys.
Yes.
And it's how do I welcome them to be whole and to treat others with wholeness and humanity? And that starts at home at 6 a.m. before they go on the bus. I always say, remember to say good morning, remember to be helpful, remember to be nice. You'll learn your sight words, you'll learn all those things, but being kind is something that's gotten so lost. And so, that constant lesson of, I love that welcoming, is how do we greet each other? I think it's really important. First, before you get to being the expert that you are, before you get to whatever your first meeting is in the day, is are you kind to be around? I think that's super important. Because if not, the degree from Harvard means nothing if you're, not a nice person to be around. If you're not a nice collaborative person, all those kinds of things get into the way.
I'm glad you brought the word collaborative, because I think we were talking about what women give, what is their greatest gift. And while men seem to build things, women seem to build the community.
Absolutely.
And that is our gift, is we know how to speak to each other, how to talk to each other, how to get things done, and how everybody can be peaceful and happy while they're doing it and feeling like they're using their gifts.
Absolutely. I think we met when I used to work at Feminist Women's Health Center here in Atlanta. And I think what I learned early on in my own experience, without maybe having the words to put to it, but then as I became a teacher for other women and helping women find their own empowerment after migration here, is that women and mothers are the true barometer of the home. We're the thermostat, we're the temperature gauge, and then that's expanded out in the community. We are the temperature gauge of a community. And I always tell my kids as they learn about, their third, fifth, and seventh. So they're learning about these world movements, these wars that we've done, these conflicts. And I always say, remember, mothers and women are the biggest losers in any war or conflict. We lose our mothers, we lose our sons, our brothers, our husbands, our uncles. And I have 3 boys, so for them it's really meaningful.
It is.
And so women's gift, I think, is always to go back to putting down the arms and teaching our kids and teaching the men in our lives and how to use communication.
You sound like Julia Howe.
Do I?
I think it was 1870, she wrote a prayer to end, a prayer for our children. I read it every Mother's Day. I'll have to send it to you.
Please do. Yeah, no, I think having 3
That's exactly
boys,
what she said.
Yeah.
Why would we want to leave our boys to war and to come home
Yeah, I can't imagine.
injured?
I can't imagine.
Is this what all our life? We need to put our arms down and put our arms around each other.
Absolutely. And in this country with weapons and guns and violence, and then in conflicts around the world, when it has become easier to shoot bullets and to buy a gun or to throw missiles than it has been to talk, we know we're doing a lot of things very wrong. And so as I have 3 young kids, I can't get away from this truth. Like, what am I teaching them? How am I teaching them to talk and to just be connected as human beings so that they never want to cause harm on anybody? Even when their dad and I were getting divorced. So let's never use them as a weapon, because in even our darkest time, we never use them as weapons for us. And so just in everything
Isn't
I do, I'm
that a
mindful about
wonderful
that.
gift in itself?
Yeah, I'm always very mindful. How are we building these connected human beings? And that's what we're not doing, which is why it gets easier to harm each other. And we've become
So in the midst of a divorce, you were able to maintain new connections.
I tried. It wasn't always successful, but one has to center themselves. What is my ultimate goal here? My ultimate purpose is to show my kids that in the hardest time, I was able to just stay true and authentic to that which was most important to me, which was to be kind and act with integrity and lead with that, even if it was just me sometimes, or
Love
in
it.
anything,
Love
just
it. Love it.
stay grounded in that. Yeah.
Well, one of the, I ask some questions when I interview people, and I often ask about primary instigating incidences that bring you to the center of what you are doing. And you almost answered that about when you came over at 7 years old from Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
Did you come did your parents come for a job?
Mm-hmm. It was really interesting. It's like a lot of immigrants. My dad had lost his job in Argentina, and my mother had not. She was always very clear for the following 15 years, and I had not lost my job. I, in fact, made more money than you did, and we were fine. Which for a woman in the 80s in Argentina, in 70s and 80s, not easily done. And she came from a poor family, the first to go to college. So for her, it was a
Wow.
great sense of pride. But my father had a first cousin that had been living in the United States for some time with his family, and had been going pretty well for him. And so my dad couldn't find a job. And he said, why don't you come and just try things out? Just like most immigrants, see how it goes for you.
See how it goes for
and
you.
if it goes well, you can bring Christina and the girls, my mom and my sister, me. And if not, you can always go back home. And so that's what he decided to do. And, it went well, and he was able to find work right away. And, one thing leads to the other. But we grew up always thinking we're going to go back, just like a lot of immigrants do.
Oh, yes.
And
The homeland.
Yeah, the homeland. And I learned subsequently when I ended up working with women is that you can't grow and thrive when you live in one world, and 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other world. So you have to just be fully committed. So that identity that has to come with you, it can't stay bifurcated, or else you don't grow, or you grow minimally. It's very difficult. But so before I get into that, he, went well. And my mom she's like, on your dad's sense of adventure, I came because we're a family. And then, my mom always wanted to go back, and there were some things that they always miss, their family and the connections and just cultural rootedness, right? But also there were things about this country that they deeply fell in love with, and like public health, and we're looking at 80s and 90s, just the infrastructure, the way things work, logistics. And there were things that they very much admired about this country that always pulled them to stay here. And before you know it, it's, 15, 20, 25, 30 years later. And
They're still here.
and yeah, you're still here, and you've lived the American dream of what, home ownership and having a pool in your backyard if you live in Florida, and you get all that. Yeah. And they lived the dream a million times over. Were there things that they always deeply, deeply missed? Absolutely. That's what I also learned about immigrants, and probably that primary instigating incidents after immigration is that sense of woundedness of immigrants doesn't go away, because you
No.
always miss. And you have to learn to carry that, which is it's a very heavy wound to carry. And so as I've gotten older, became a mother, had children, and I think that's probably then what has propelled me in the career choices I've made, is just to work with adult immigrants in different ways, and then bridge it over to adults learning and nonprofit and training and education for adults. Because how do we succeed in one way, but then carry deep wounds and deep pains in another way? And that's kind of the human condition everywhere. So I think that's really, for what most immigrants experience, which people don't readily understand when you've had the privilege of being and staying in your home country like the US always, where everything was where you needed it to be in your own home country. It's very different.
It's interesting. I just came back from South Africa, and it's the same thing. That's their home country, the Africans, the natives. But they lost their home when during apartheid.
The Dutch.
They took all of their land. They took all of their resources. They took all of their ability to maintain a livelihood through law.
Yes, and it's still there, but it's there.
And they're, what was shocking to me is when you listen to them, there's that same sense of grief. It's a universal global grief. Very interesting.
It is, and they have the least amount of land ownership are Black Africans in South Africa, and it was their land, right?
They're working though, very beautifully. They just had elections. One of my friends went over. Do you know Helen Butler?
I do know Helen.
Helen just got back. She was there as an election observer.
Wow.
With Dr. Durley.
Wow.
And two others that I don't know. So, and it went very, very smoothly. But they're on a path toward reparations. And it's going very, very slowly, but I'm so proud to see that. And I think there will be a sense of restoration when that happens.
Yeah, I think the path towards healing has to include, we have to have space, which is so hard, right? But have to have space for that which was taken and the wounds that were inflicted and caused in power dynamics and power over and in colonialization and things like that. And we can't have true restorative justice in any way if we don't really help people grieve for what was taken and
That's
lost.
right. That's right. And to really take ownership. That when you get that back, it will be yours. Now will you be able to manage it?
Right.
We have to give them, that's part of reparation, is offering them the ability to learn how to manage that which they now will receive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's part of, in the South, I think that a paradigm in a similar struggle is, the legacy of slavery in the South and in the country, of course, but the structural inequality that perpetuates unequal access to opportunity via systemic injustice.
Amen.
And when we talk about this, the system works for everybody. No, it doesn't, and it never has. And until we really look at the way the education system in South Fulton looks grossly different from the education system in North Fulton County, where I live, the opposite ends of the spectrum. Kids go home from middle school every day with an iPad versus the school system in South Atlanta, where it's predominantly African American and poor. And why are those? And it's the same county, as we know. So where does that come from? What are the legacies? And really unpacking that, and looking again at property taxes, and again, just the legacies of the way things are structurally unequal.
Exactly. And I get, one of the best gifts I've had since I've been in Atlanta has been knowing people like you and people who are working on the foundations of that systemic racism, affordable housing, quality education, reparations, creating community schools so that that the community schools of balance and form, and just to be able to keep those ideas at the forefront and bring people in that have the vision to allow this to happen. Nobody here has the vision. We're just getting it.
Right.
We don't have some superstar that is jumping down into the middle of Atlanta and saying, whoa, this is the way that we want this to be. Everybody's talking almost like the House of Babel in different languages, but we're getting it. It's coming.
I think it's one of the, you mentioned affordable housing, or the lack of affordable housing is really something that's impacting most cities across the country.
Absolutely.
From San Francisco to Charlotte, to Atlanta. But when we're coming from an administration where 97 to 98% of the new housing built in the city of Atlanta was considered luxury, and then you look at, again, us having the slowest or the lowest rate of economic mobility in the country, and then with Charlotte in North Carolina having the lowest equitable growth as well. And we look at housing and the expense of housing and how we just continue to not address that a $350,000 home is not median income. It doesn't come from median income. And so how do we fix that? And really looking at housing, and it has to start with housing. And
it does have to start with housing, and why? You know, I remember when the Beltline was being built, there was a promise that was made.
Absolutely.
And nobody checked. Why?
Yeah.
I don't get it. You said you were going to put 10% of housing for affordable housing, and then you didn't do it.
And 10% isn't nearly enough.
No way, but it would have been something.
Right, exactly. in 10% afford, and what we're looking at affordable housing isn't really affordable. Because we're looking at stagnant wages, and we're looking at when somebody works full time or a full time job plus a part time job, and they still can't make their rent on their apartment, and how that destabilizes, and that constant struggle destabilizes families. And yet we continue to build more housing that is considered luxury.
And who is going to live in them?
Exactly. And
like,
so,
who is going to come to Atlanta? That's what scares
exactly.
me.
And it also, where are we going to be in 10 to 15 years
Yes.
when we're not addressing this? So the long term,
Or who is going to be in Atlanta in 10 years?
Exactly. And just the economic, just the viability of communities when we're building luxury housing, and our job market can't keep up with it. We know recent grads, even folks with a master's degree or PhD, were mired in student debt. So again, it perpetuates this fallacy that's just not real. You don't graduate from a college or a master's degree ready to pay for your affordable condo on the Beltline or in Buckhead or in Midtown. You don't. And so being real about that, and how do we build, I was just in a really cool professional development from Institute for the Future. Which
an Institute for the, where was that?
It was here, actually, right by the airport. It was a training that I got to attend. I was asked to give welcoming remarks, and I was like, okay. And it was looking at the social sector, kind of looking back to look forward. And so we were talking about the kind of professionalization of nonprofit effectiveness, how just the growth of the nonprofit sector, and where it used to be God's work and charity work on Sundays towards, master's degrees and undergraduate certificates in nonprofit management, things like that. But it was led by Institute for the Future. And so it was talking about how we look at the community that we want to create, or conditions we want to have in the future, and start building them in the present. And so I was like, yeah, that makes obvious sense, right? The future is always going to be in the future. So what community do we envision? And really looking at it hyper local. What community do we envision? And then what do we start doing, or what are we doing today to work towards that? And so looking at the housing issue, it's like, what kind of Atlanta are we creating in the continued unsustainable?
I think that's very important. Today we were talking about the Atlanta Public Schools and their system of charters, and now they're doing these system of they call them excellent schools, and it's a portfolio model, because they have clustered all of the schools, and then if you have a portfolio, you take all of the cluster, and the weakest schools will be eliminated at the bottom, so these will be strong, and then the others will have to spread out. Well, you keep doing that with all of the clusters. Who is going to be the beneficiary of being knocked out?
It's always the people that do the best. Obviously, which is what we always, and it's so interesting the way
But you will have no, well, you'll have a different definition of poverty. You know, people in Atlanta, if they keep this up and they continue with the housing market that's luxury, people that are poor are going to be at the low end of luxury, only making $200,000 instead of $600,000.
Right, and is that really the kind of community we want to create?
No.
Again, right, this gluttony, right, this
No.
constant gluttony of more, more, more. But again, the way we're looking at those clusters or schools and kids, again, it has to be more equitable, and it has to be not prioritizing more monetary gain, but just functional families that are functioning well and students that are functioning well.
Exactly.
And we have a long way to go to get everybody towards a more equal place, obviously, in Atlanta particularly.
So getting back to the topic, I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about the challenges that the foundation has in helping equity become a reality, especially with the number of nonprofits that are seeking to be the solution for the problems that Atlanta's facing.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So, we became at the beginning of the year, Foundation Center came together with GuideStar, and we became a new 501c3 organization called Candid. So now we have the two organizations with kind of the largest infrastructural capacity around philanthropy coming together. So Foundation Center always focused and looked at foundation data to help provide tools and trainings and education and knowledge resources on how people give, how foundations give, how different types of givers, give. And GuideStar works on the nonprofit side of things, looking at nonprofit tools for effectiveness. And so now coming together. And what I always say, just before that one decides to embark on another 501c3, Atlanta has the highest number of nonprofits instituted in the country, and we have for about 3 years.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it's also, part of it is also a little problematic. Like, we don't want to dash people's dreams or hopes about starting a nonprofit. But the reality is that there are usually, you can usually find at least one or two nonprofits doing similar enough work to work collaboratively. Because what ends up happening is that people end up competing for the same resources.
Money, yes.
And there's not enough to go around. And so I think one of the challenges is really asking, do we need to incorporate another nonprofit? Could we volunteer? Could we not volunteer, but come together with another organization in another way? Or is there a different way that I could perhaps structure what I want to do?
So do you get them together, or do they come together at the Foundation Center?
Well, we don't get them together. We just offer a lot of different options to think about the work that you want to do as a nonprofit, right? What is it that your heart desires? What is your passion? What's your issue? Is it education? Is it health? Is it veterans? Is it working with animals? Is it gang prevention? Is it early literacy?
Talk radio.
Talk radio, right? If you want to gain more funding for absolutely for journalism and journalism integrity. So that's that's what we do is looking at just across the board what we always call tools, trainings, and convenings for the broad social sector. So in your question related to equity, I think, again, what I hope to always bring into is that point of access, and how are we bridging people's opportunities to get the access to the knowledge and information, regardless of your own starting line. Because the majority of folks that start their own nonprofit is because it was a personal experience, something that moved.
Exactly. It is true.
Right. And not necessarily the folks that have had the luxury of having a master's in public planning or a master's in public administration. And so you have this passion because something really critical happened to you, your family, somebody that you know that moved you in this way to start this. And then people usually file their 501c3, and then they start putting their board together, and then they start maybe trying to write their first or second grant and find how incredibly challenging and difficult it is. And then you start taking one class, maybe another class here, another class there, and then you realize, wow, like I really didn't realize how much knowledge and professional expertise it takes to write a grant, to build
That's
a
right.
board. And so then people often feel really frustrated and disheartened because they're like, I don't know how to write a grant. I've never written a grant. I don't know how to get a coffee meeting with a funder, or how to do an elevator pitch, or how to position myself on social media. And all of these things is what it takes to get grants, right? It's just such a different package of skill sets. And so one of the things that we really try to focus on is how are we, the tools and the trainings and the opportunities for skill building that we offer, are they reaching a broad and diverse audience, right? Where you don't have to have your master's to understand what's going on. It's kind of start where you are, and that we're able to reach people across a broad spectrum of life experiences and lived experiences to get them to the next level, right? Because everybody's in a different starting line.
That's right.
And so that's always at the heart. I think because of my own experience of being included or excluded, or all that my parents had to learn, and not knowing what you don't know, and then you just wing it, right? I'm the embodiment of just winging it on something really big, like immigrating to another country. So I understand that just winging it when a nonprofit. But how can we do that and really bring a center where people can come and feel like they're really welcome, that they can keep coming back to this place for continued education and support and knowledge.
Is it still downtown?
Yes. We're getting ready to move. We can't quite say yet where, but we're going to be somewhere really close and in a more in-community space.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yes.
It's really hard to park down there, I'm telling
It is,
you.
yes, and that's our exactly. So that's what's one of the things looking at is, are we really in a place where we are more holistically accessible and more rooted in community?
Not only that, it takes so long to get there. And then it takes so long to get into the building.
Yes, and then the building,
And then you have to leave before rush hour.
yes,
That
Or your
I-
parking meter before your parking meter turns, right?
Yes, those are all true.
Right,
Those
and
are all
so
true.
those are things that we've been considering for the past few years, and why we're pivoting from our library spaces to be more in community and to work in partnership with our partners and with other organizations, so that we are more in your community, wherever that is. For me, it's the southern region of 11 states. So how are we connecting to folks? It's great when you live in Atlanta, but how are we connecting to folks in Macon, in Chattanooga, in Ellijay, in Dawsonville, in Dallas, Houston, those border communities? How are we bridging the rural-urban gap and working with other public partners or publicly facing partners and community-based partners, so that we can hold these trainings in a way that just reaches more and different people?
I love it. I love it. I love it. So when you, we were talking early on before we came online, and we were talking about all the experiences that you've had that brought you to this point, and that you're going to jump off to something else. But I'd like people who are listening to just hear a little bit about how you have bounced from one space to another, and why.
I like that. I like bouncing. I'm a person that I'm not frightened by change. I always wonder how people that have been in positions for 15, 20 years, how they could do that. I think that also takes another skill set. But I always, as a social worker, first and foremost, I chose social work, and kind of social work chose me because of all of the things I loved to do. And I remember when I declared social work as my major. Before that, my major was international relations, because I wanted to get to know and be able to have the experience of connecting with people across the world, and learning intercultural communications. That was another love of mine. And political science, that was another love. And teaching and therapy. So I'm a clinician by trade. First and foremost, I'm a licensed clinician. And so I loved all those kind of aspects of, and then I was a school-based social worker. That was what my original love was. Ooh. Yes. And so I worked a lot in that space of mental health and parental well-being and mother well-being with kids and teachers in schools. And then I think schools are the best place to intervene for communities, not just for a child, but for communities. And I don't think we use schools enough.
Correct.
So what are other hubs that should be in schools, that are connected to schools, so that we can use schools as the kind of ground zero for communities, for all things support, all things growth. And so that
Now,
kind of,
you and I are on the same wavelength
Yes.
with that, because I think the community is the heartbeat of the city.
absolutely. And I think schools are the heartbeat of the community, schools and homes. I think that we tried it with Title I schools with parent liaisons in the parent liaison office, but I think that that's kind of a deficit perspective. It's like families that need more help versus communities need more togetherness.
Yes.
So if we were reposition and realign, then people wouldn't feel like I need services. I need to be included, as all people do.
Correct.
So I think that's
architecture.
Yes, and it's planning. It's urban planning.
It is.
Right? It's looking at how do we plan urban or rural. It's how we plan for community vitality.
Did you talk about that at that workshop you were?
Did I? I probably did. I usually do start because I went to graduate school specifically because a teacher of mine really nurtured and saw my love at Georgia State University, my alma mater, which I love, my love for schools. And he said, I think you should look at, as my mentor also, I think you should look at Columbia University's School of Social Work because they have a specific school-based and school-related services program development track within social work. And that was all I needed to hear. I was like, one track mind for them on. I was like, that's where I need to be.
Columbia, South Carolina?
No, Columbia University in New York City.
New York
Oh,
City.
and then I knew I needed to live in New York City,
There
of course.
you go. Okay.
So I think kind of I've bounced, but always within the kind of the Venn diagram of family well-being, of child well-being, and of schoolwork and communities. And I always think that the place where all of that always aligns is schools, whether I was the school social worker or I was the sexual and reproductive health expert that got to come in and work with students at the school or with mothers at the parent program or creating those parent programs where there were none at Title I schools around the city of Atlanta and Metro Atlanta, really creating those spaces. And I realized that I had the ability to bounce because nobody was creating these programs in the way that I saw needed to be, a little egotistical. But again, that intersectionality.
Gift.
Right? Yeah, that just like, we need to work with moms, we need to work with students, we need to work with teachers, and we need to work from a place of empowerment and whole being, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm getting to create curricula and trainings in both Spanish and English because they weren't in existence. And I didn't need this huge module that was going to be evaluated over a 3-year period. I needed something now because there were moms that needed to be included now. I needed kids for their parents to be empowered now. And so having bouncing in different places and in different roles, because it allowed me the creativity that my family would have needed and did need, and whether it was there or not.
That's your primary instigating incidents.
Yep, going back to my family.
Going back to that.
Absolutely. Well, and I always did that, just even before I was conscious of it, I always kind of came from a place of what would have helped my parents in 1985. And my goodness, there was, obviously Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There were a few crucial things, but then there were a lot of other things that just relate to wholeness and well-being. And why did my mom cry so much as an immigrant mom? Which I think every kid can remember their mother crying. Dad's the stoic, strong one. And mom has to swallow a lot of pain.
That's right.
And isolation and loneliness. And so my mom just needed a community of being. And I think that's what I've always just tried to do.
Did she find people?
Eventually, she did, but it took too long. It was a church in Sarasota, Florida, where we were raised. Again, there wasn't the immigrant hubs we have now, or Latino cultural centers, or Latino programs.
Yes.
We just didn't have that, and so until they found a church community, but it took too long. And so that's why I always think, for me, it's like it shouldn't take that long to create community because we all need the same things. We all need connectedness, right? If anything, Oprah's taught us, right? We need connectedness and we need to belong. And I was like, yeah, that's every mom. And if you've had little kids and you've been a stay-at-home mom too, you know that it's those play groups that save you, right?
Yes. Yes.
So going back again to the very kind of rudimentary things that we need, and why not do those in a school? Why not do those in other places like libraries where moms can go and take their little kids? So that's
very
another place.
important to talk about that too in light of churches. In our community, as I was growing up, the church fulfilled that.
Right.
But today, there are so many churches that are so selective.
Yes.
You're not allowed to go there. But in a school, they must accept everyone.
Right.
Public school.
Yes.
So, I'm sad to say that. There are some people in some churches that are not accepted
Yeah, absolutely.
right now, but hopefully we can change that.
Yeah, I remember in the church where we first started, the same church where my mother's buried now. Now they have their Latina church. My mother passed away 5 years ago at 64, and still the first question I ask myself is, will my mother be proud? Would this have helped her? at some point as a young mother, or would she be proud of this? It's still my guiding, because she worked really hard. But the church was a place where the American English mass had to make space. And so I remember in the beginning, we were kind of in the cafeteria aspect of the American church. We weren't in the sanctuary. And then space was open. And then eventually the Latino community was able to have a capital campaign, which my parents were founding members of, to have their own sister church where it was all in Spanish.
Wonderful.
And now they have, like, I think seven services on Sundays, all in Spanish. And so anyway, that again, creating community and creating being welcomed. And a lot of churches, as you know, we connect a lot about that on social media. A lot of churches aren't the welcoming space that they should be. And so I go back to schools. Schools ought to be.
Yeah, public schools
ought to be, absolutely.
have to.
Hopefully all schools, but public schools still have that.
Well, look
demand.
at religious schools, because I taught in the Catholic schools for most of my life. They were not accepting of everyone.
Absolutely.
Even people in the same family, if the children didn't fit this certain norms, we sent them to the public school for services. So we just took the mid group. If they were extremely talented, we sent them to the public schools. Mm-hmm. And then you have all that separation and division within. But we gave a service to the middle, and we really brought those children, we moved them on. But I always say, there's nothing, there was nothing to keep everyone together.
Right. And I think that's so interesting, having kids now, they're in about to finish, right? 7th grade, 5th grade, and 3rd grade, that I think that we need to rethink the whole school system. And I know everybody says that, but I do too. I mean, I'm going to jump in that bandwagon. And I'm a brainiac. I was a nerd. School came very easily to me. So I'm coming from a very pro-academic perspective. I never took my studies liberally. I was that bookworm. My school was just always my thing. But being the parent now and seeing how overwhelmed they are with
no recess,
with technology, with even just trying to help them figure out how to study across they have no books. The whole, I mean, I feel old saying this.
They have no books?
No, everything is Google Classroom. So everything is online, and all of their research, they have access to an untold number of data and resources. But when it comes to study time, you would think they'd be in college, because they have to know how to curate, all these links. So they have all this knowledge at their fingertips, right? They study about what's going on in Japan and other parts of the world in real time. But the technology, it's just so much, it's overwhelming for them and for me as well.
Poor little brains.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's so screen time. So then when we look at, like you're saying, what schools have done, and then just looking at community violence and the way we're not taking care of kids, I think we're teaching to the test and all those things. We are not teaching kids how to be human beings.
Exactly.
And I think that being a mom now,
the only thing happens, it comes to their head.
Right.
And then they leave school.
And they're wired because their eyes have been in front of that technology light. And I think that almost like half the day should be academics, and then the other half should be experiential learning through play, and working together. Because what you were just describing about the middle kids, the high kids are pushed somewhere else, the lower third is pushed somewhere else. But then we don't know how to relate as adults in a shared space or a shared ecosystem. And that's what you see now. We have all these divisions, and no matter what community, whether it's the same intergroup versus intragroup differences, the way we have a need to siphon off and say, you're worthy, you're not worthy, you're almost worthy, but not quite enough. You belong here, but you're not, because you haven't had this special certification or skill set. But yet we all live in the same world, right? And so the way that we are not teaching our kids, which then we just become adults, who don't know how to work and play and live together. I think in schools now, we're just kind of funnel them through this learning that they have to check off. We have to teach this competency. We have to teach this skill set. We have to teach this.
I just wrote about that as a teacher. One of the problems I had with the public school system, and I retired from it, so it was a recent vintage, is that I became a manager of a curriculum. I didn't become a teacher.
Right.
And I was given what I was to teach.
Right.
And some of the teachers had said they came from systems where they had scripts. They literally read scripts. to the kids. I said, you've got to be kidding. Nope.
It's shocking, but
And
not
that's what I
surprising.
think we should do here is have these scripts. It makes it so easy. I said, you're a teacher.
Right. And you know what? Being an adult isn't easy. Man,
is not.
It's not easy. I mean, I always go back to, being a very highly functioning adult with a Ivy League master's degree. And it's still hard to be an adult. Just put the weight of the world, right? A parent dying while you're going through a divorce with 3 little kids. That alone takes a lot. But
Catch your breath.
yes.
Catch your breath.
Yes, it's a lot. And so we have so much on our shoulders every day.
So stop right there and tell me, how do you catch your breath?
I think the kids always remind me when I get home, like the balance of trying to leave work behind, because work always like do more, right?
Just like them.
Yes, just like them. So I, just sit with them. Usually come home at dinner time. We always, eat as a family.
That's
catch
good.
our breath every night.
That's
and
good.
talk. And in the end, just try to think my mother's death. Of course, her life was very meaningful to me and her experiences, but her death was untimely. And so that taught me that what we have guaranteed for sure is right now. And it taught me that nothing and no state of being is ever guaranteed or is ever really yours.
No.
And so to live in love and be in joy right now, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And that I learned that in a very frightening way, in a very scary way. And then you have to keep going. And so living in love and in happiness and joy and trying to find that mindfulness every day is how I try to catch
Do you
my breath.
meditate?
I do. When I don't meditate, I can tell because I'm not doing well, right? I can tell.
Do your children meditate?
I try to. At night, we meditate before we go to sleep.
Good.
And sometimes in the morning, if I'm really, really on my game in the morning, we'll try to set an intention for the day before we get on the school bus, before they get on the bus. And I drop my middle schooler off. We'll do an intention on the way to school. And for me, as adults, we have to, what's your intention? Is your intention to run another hamster wheel kind of day, or is your intention something else? And so trying to stay, I love Buddhism and Buddhist teachings. And so trying to stay really mindful in my leadership, mindful in cultivating a work environment for my team as the leader and as part of a team too, right?
I'm listening to your voice and I can hear it going all the time.
Oh, it's always going.
And when do you, to be able to stop your voice?
It's important.
And to stop everything inside of you, because then you become more of yourself.
Absolutely. It's very important to do that.
I love you.
I love
All
you.
right, now we just have a few minutes.
Okay.
And I wondered, we could just take a few minutes to think about what you said and the gifts that you've offered us, this wonderful interview, the gift of yourself.
Thank you.
And ask, what would you like people to take away from this interview? The listeners who will be listening to it.
I think, maybe what I tell myself every day is to try and know that just being kind is enough, and that being loving is, and radiating love and radiating smiles as we walk through our busy lives with whomever we encounter, that's enough. Because all we talked about, we live in a world where you're measured all the time, right? You're as good as your last grant, or you're as good as your last big win, whatever industry you work in. And we forget that being nice is more important, and being loving and creating harmony in our communities is more important than any of those things.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Tell everybody about your youngest son and what he left under your pillow.
Oh my gosh.
That is
the
so
sweetest.
sweet.
I know, this is what brings me. So I have, like I said, 3 boys. My youngest just turned 9 last week. And the oldest one, he's kind of lost his teeth a little slower in life. And so he had lost a molar. He's 13. And so my youngest son, Sebastian, was teasing him and saying, I know that the tooth fairy isn't real, but what are you going to ask for the tooth fairy? And so my 13-year-old looks at me in this very, funny preteen. He's like, yeah, Mama, what is the tooth fairy going to bring me? And it was at the end of the day, the dishes were still not washed. And I was like, I want the tooth fairy to bring me something. I'm like, I want the tooth fairy to leave something under my pillow. I'm like, I want a note under, and I'm like, and Mama wants some money under her pillow. And they kind of looked at me and they have this, was like, oh yeah, Mom's a human being. I'm like, I want something under my pillow. And it was funny. So we all moved on, and my 13-year-old was like, ha ha. And I'm like, I know you want a PlayStation under your pillow. I get that. And so then, 2.5, my youngest goes to bed at 8:30. So 2.5 hours later, I get in bed. It's 11 p.m. And I set my head on the pillow, and I'm like, what the heck? And literally quarters roll out from underneath my pillow. And he had taken out all his quarters from his piggy bank and written me a love note. And he was my tooth fairy, leaving money and a love note under my pillow. And I think every time I thought about it and told the story for 2 weeks, it made me cry, because it's just the sweetest, most tender-hearted thing ever.
It is. And, that's everything that you have talked about.
Thank you, Diane.
The most important thing is kindness.
Thank you. I believe it.
And thinking of others.
Because I think in the work that I do, capacity building and teaching and learning, it's for the lifelong, right?
It is.
It's something that we work on all the time. And being kind is just so easy.
And we're re-envisioning communities right here where we are.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Thank you
Well,
so much.
I want to say thank you so much for being with us and having this excellent conversation, Maria.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's always such a pleasure to be in your company,
Aren't we
Diane.
Aren't we lucky?
We are very
to have
lucky.
each other?
We are,
I'm telling you.
absolutely.
So we're listening to Maria Azuri. She is at the Foundation Center, and she's given us a wonderful conversation about intersectionality, about her life, and about how we live.
Thank you
Being
so much.
kind.
Yeah, being kind.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This is the end. Thank you all very much. I think there is not. I think there's no more news. We've heard all the good news tonight.
If people want to learn more about the work that we do, always go to we're at candid.org.
Oh, that's right, candid.org. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I was there and I looked at it. It's very interesting, especially if you have a nonprofit and you would like more information or education.
Absolutely. And what I want to leave is grantspace.org. That's our main free training portal. And you can find a plethora of free resources with templates and a lot of nonprofit management tools accessible from home and for free online. That's grantspace.org. And that's a service of Candid.
And I wanted to ask one other thing. If you have a need for a grant, could they just call down to the Foundation Center and get some advice in how to find out who the grantors might be?
Oh, absolutely. That's our bread and butter right there. So we have if you're looking for a grant, if you're looking for any type of capacity building for nonprofit management leadership that relates to fundraising, board cultivation, nonprofit effectiveness, all of those kinds of great things on making your impact and your passion in your community. We have so many different trainings. So please visit definitely candid.org and grantspace.org.
There you go. So that will give you a lead to the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you, Diane.
Carry on with vigor.
With vigor. Thank you.